Hi, Jess, Pat, George.
Good morning.
Good morning, all. Hi, Pat. Good to see you.
Hello, how are you?
Good. Good morning. Hi, Bess. Hello, hello. We'll let everyone trickle in here. If you are in a good place and want to turn your video on, I'd love to see your faces. If not, I understand. Um, I appreciate your guys' flexibility here with the sort of the last minute shift. Um, I have an engagement I have to go to this for lunchtime here for me.
That's right. We're not doing anything else because we're not working, are we? Otherwise, we wouldn't be here.
Keeping it real, Pat.
I thought I'd make everyone laugh. That's all.
Hi, Jillian. All right. Well, let's get started. I don't have a sort of predetermined agenda here other than sort of an AMA. I'll pop the question board link into the chat here if you guys want to jump into there. Otherwise, I expect a smaller group today just because of the shift in time. So if you want to drop questions into that job board, job board, that question board, and I just put the code in there, or else just holler out or just drop it into the chat, whatever works for everyone. Um, Hi, Samir. So just a quick show of hands. Who's first time here? Bess, first time here. Okay, cool. So I'll just give a brief, quick introduction. I do this every week. I've been with the NSA now. Well, my two job search councils have since moved on, but I was moderating two over the past 9 months, so I'm familiar with the NSA playbook. And one thing I realized over my time in moderating was that um, there's a lot that is not known about the recruiting process. And as a recruiter for the past 11 years now, um, I felt like there was a lot of light that could be shed on the process that would really help job seekers with a better understanding, really so that it would help job seekers, yeah, at minimum, understand how to manage their expectations with the process, with the recruiter, and so forth. And at best, they'd be able to use some of these insights to really maximize their time, minimize their effort, and really figure out how to partner with their recruiters as they're going through this process, and really put the recruiters to work for them, so to speak. So anyway, that's what I'm doing here. Today is a bit of a change in terms of time. I usually do this at 3 p.m. Mountain Time, and so and then usually I do well, for the past 3 months, I've been doing sort of an AMA format, Ask Me Anything format, quite unstructured. And the past few weeks, I've been trying to move to more of a structured format. And today is a little bit unstructured. I think it's high time to kind of just touch on the backlog that has been accruing over the past few weeks in terms of questions. So, hi, Samir. Good to see you. Hi, Victor. Okay, this is for you guys. So, I'll let you guys drive with any questions. Otherwise, I'll just pluck off the top of the question board. Um, and I will try to go at a moderate pace. If you have any questions and you want more nuance and you want to go deeper in a given question, let's do it. So, it's just me trying to balance sort of breadth and depth. And a lot of times when you guys ask nuanced questions, it jogs my memory. So it's really helpful if you guys do that. Otherwise, I might just be skimming the surface. So, okay. Hey,
I
Kyle.
do have a
Yeah,
question
Samir.
to that I didn't see on the board here, but I can bring it up or as you're going through this. Maybe you want to hit the ones that are upvoted twice, and then maybe I can surface my question.
Yeah, sure. We could do that. Otherwise you could drop it in as well.
Sounds good.
But I mean, while you have the floor here, what is your question?
Yeah. So I wanted to understand how I might be able to use, um, uh, the narrative about my career break, where I did spend some time in, uh, getting closer to my passion in classical music, and how I might weave that into my LinkedIn narrative. I I feel at times that it might come across as unfocused on upskilling myself or giving back to the product management community for me to go off and pursue my creative skills in classical music. But I've also heard the other perspective that says that, well, it's something that completes me. It is a very deliberate and thoughtful approach toward taking a career break to connect with the music and community through that. So I'm kind of on the fence about how to
Yeah,
describe it in my LinkedIn profile, if I should at all.
that is a great question. It's complex and there's no one answer to it. I will try to give you my response from the perspective of a recruiter. And again, this is just one perspective. So for what that's worth, and folks out there, if you have any insights into this, I'm sure Samir would love your perspective as
Yeah, I would
well.
love to. Absolutely.
So let's open the floor to that as well. So when I look at a candidate, there's a lot to unpack there. So one is, it sounds like there's been some extended time where you've been out of your professional work or your
Right.
career work, which it sounds like it's product management.
Yes. Yes. I
Okay.
was most recently principal product manager at Amazon.
Okay. And then you've been dedicating some time to which is one of your passions, which is classical music. And okay, so I guess one question I would have is, and you don't have to answer it here, but is one question I would have is that effort and you're putting into that attention you're putting into in terms of your classical music, like I would think about like how that might overlap with what you're doing in your career as a product manager.
Okay.
Um, as a recruiter, when I look at somebody that has sort of interesting or sort of different like passions or interests, for me that's a plus. It actually helps me remember people better, right? So I
Good
would
point.
play that
Good point.
I would play that up. Again, this is just from my perspective. Like I would play that up as something that you're passionate about.
Yeah.
So I think I've mentioned this before in previous sessions. When I look at my shorthand for remembering a person, and I have to have shorthand because I don't have the best memory, right? Is I look is a plus, and I do this in my notes. Is a plus, a minus, a star, and then question marks, right? So the star is like what's interesting and different about this person that helps me remember them. And so in your
Got it.
example, your passion for classical music would go into that star because it's not every day that somebody, and I don't want to make any assumptions here, but I assume that your passion for classical music is like you're not just learning how to, you know,
Oh, I've
play the
studied it
viola or anything.
in depth for 25 plus years.
Okay, so
I've
that's
performed with the
amazing.
world's best. It's
Yeah.
not a joke kind
So
of
it's
thing.
like,
But
near world class, if not world class. So like, because that's amazing for me. Like, and I think there was a woman here, I forgot her name, that she was an Olympic athlete, an Olympic competitor. And like just as a recruiter hearing that, already I'm like, okay, there must be something there that it's worth exploring. There must be something spiky or unique about this person, right? And so there is that, what do you call that? It's called the halo bias, right? If somebody's
I
good
see
at
what you
one
mean. Yeah,
thing,
yeah,
you
yeah.
kind of project that they're good at other things.
Right,
So
right, right.
as a recruiter, I'm conscious of that as well, right? So
Mhm.
just because they're good at classical music doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be great as a product manager. But it does suggest that they have passions that they've pushed and pursued to a high degree of excellence, right?
True, true.
And so yeah, I'm aware of that bias, that sort of halo bias, but at the same time, it is something unique and spiky. And when a recruiter is communicating or championing you internally, they'll use, so I won't say for all recruiters, but for me as a recruiter, when I'm championing someone to my client or championing them internally, I will use that shorthand to reference the person. Oh, this is the person that's they're master uh, viola player, or this
Got it.
person is they're an ex-Olympic competitor, right? And it's a shorthand way for me to communicate internally about someone, right? And so if you can, that I would leverage that as a way to kind of differentiate yourself for sure.
I see.
Um,
I see.
to your point about is it unfocused? What I would think would be unfocused is if you're pursuing a career that's completely separate from product management, in classical music, while simultaneously pursuing a career in product management that are completely like it's a fork in the road. Like if I had that perception as a recruiter after talking with you or reviewing your resume or whatnot, I that for me would be like I'd have to clarify that. I'd have to better understand that,
Yes. Got it. Got
So
it.
I think you want to be careful there. Um,
I think that makes sense. So pursuing some passion as a serious passion that you want to reconnect with at some point in the middle of your career versus, a consistent four different career stints, all in product leadership,
yeah,
all in cloud, and music had just been on the side, and now I'm reconnecting with it. That's two totally different approaches.
yeah, yeah. As a recruiter, what would be interesting to me, if you have a career in product management and that's a career you're going to continue pursuing, if there was a way to integrate your passion with, especially if in this interim period where you're looking for your next position, if there's a way that you can integrate your passion for classical music and product management
Yeah,
in some sort of projects that you're doing or something like that, that would be an interesting story for me to hear as a recruiter.
I see.
Um, because as a recruiter, one of the questions I have, or one of the insights that I try to draw on, is what if someone's been unemployed for an extended amount of time, how have they been using that time,
For
right?
sure.
And
Yeah.
and I know job search is a full-time job. I know that. But if there's ways that you can augment that story by integrating, one of your big passions with your professional passions or career passions, that would make for an interesting story.
Got it. Got it.
So
That's excellent food for thought. Thanks a lot, Eric.
yeah, I hope that
I
helps.
saw some comment from the participants here as well. So, Bess, thank you. Appreciate it. That's a good way to think about the perceived benefits of having a passion.
It's a huge benefit for someone in product. You're kind of an outlier, so I would play that up for sure.
Got it. Got it. Good to know. Thanks.
Um, let's see. So Bess, it demonstrates that you're both left. Yeah, totally. How can we approach recruiters? I don't seem to be having any luck. Yeah, Pat, this is sort of the I guess like the $1 million question. Recruiters right now are a lot of them are out of work. If they're not out
Uh-huh.
of work, they are just inundated with stacks of resumes for multiple job postings, right? And so how do you get their time? I wouldn't say there's a silver bullet to it. I think if you just apply those principles of networking and trying to connect with folks that may know them.
Mhm.
Um, Again, from my perspective, I get a lot of requests. Um, and not that I don't take any requests. I've been putting up this, I don't know, this barrier in terms of a paywall. Um, but there are folks that have, taken me up on that, and I do spend time with them. But I also spend time with folks that reach out to me in interesting ways. And so, without that paywall, right? And so I think you have to be creative. I think you have to be persistent. I think you have to demonstrate some sort of value to the recruiter, even if it's just a genuine interest in what they do or who they are, or how you might be able to help them. So one of the things, like if someone steps to me and asks me, how can I help you? That is great. It's a step above what most people do, and it's much appreciated. But if you take it a step further and say, hey, based on what I know about you, based on what I've seen, based on what your LinkedIn profile, here's a few ways that I can help, right? That's taking it to the next level.
Mhm.
And so just asking somebody, how can I help? Yes, you're taking it from what most people do, which is nothing. But to take it even further, it's like, okay, well, here's a few ideas that I came up with how I can help, right? So, there's some suggestions, right? It comes, that doesn't just apply to recruiters, it applies to networking in general. But it takes effort. It takes effort to do that. And so just so you know, from my perspective, most people don't do anything. Then the next level is they'll do a connection request on LinkedIn because it's pretty easy to do a connection request. Next is they'll do a connection request with something written.
Mhm.
The first level of connection request is just connection request. There's no message sent, nothing. Then then what I get by volume or frequency is somebody that's writing something, right?
Yeah.
And the next level is, how can I help?
Mhm.
And then the next level is they've thought about how they can help and they're already pitching it to me.
Yeah.
And so it's very difficult for me to say no at that point.
Yeah.
Like, man,
Yeah.
this person's already like offering me help. Like, why would I say no?
Yeah.
So like
Yeah.
those are sort of I don't know, like I don't know if it's a hierarchy of kind of outreach that I get as a
Yeah.
recruiter,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
And
I've started doing number three. So I would find, because I have a huge aviation background, so I've found some aviation recruiters on LinkedIn, then
yeah,
sent them a connection request. But in the request, it was all about, I see that you're in aviation, I'm in aviation. Would you like me to introduce you to my network?
that's perfect. I mean, you've already thought ahead about like you've shown them that you've looked at their profile at least
Yeah.
and you've drawn something out of it and you're relating to them and you're personalizing the outreach to them,
Right.
right? And those are multiple steps. And again, just for some perspective, most people don't do all those steps because it's a lot of work,
Mm.
right? And so, um, we talked a little bit about AI last week. If there's ways, well, I know there are ways because I'm doing them. There are ways that you can integrate AI to draw out those, I don't know, those touch points or those angles from a given profile. So, I mean, you could start with a LinkedIn profile. You might have their resume. You might have some other things that maybe they've created some content, whether it's, I don't know, YouTube videos or posts or whatever, right? You could feed that into an AI and say, hey, what are some interesting um, sort of bullet points or angles that I can integrate into an outreach message to this person,
Mhm.
right? And the AI will give you some bullet points or whatever, and then you can go through them and be like, oh, this is interesting. This is interesting. Okay, yeah, and you could use that as sort of like a beachhead, right? Or a talking point or a touch point to relate to the person,
Mhm. Okay.
right? And so to do this manually takes time, right? And I don't think it's disingenuous to use AI to draw some of these things out.
Mhm.
I mean, it's up to you, right? But some people might have different opinions. But if you can draw some of these things out of their profile, out of their content, then it could make your outreach much more effective. So
Okay. Good. Thank you.
sure. Let's see. I suggest recording recruits online with leads. Yeah, for sure. Um, okay. Feel free to drop any questions or holler. I'm just gonna start going through this question board here. There's ways that you can upvote. So if there's any questions there that kind of resonate with you, feel free to upvote, or just if you have one that's top of mind, just drop one in. So for those who got a job during the peak job market, how, if at all, should we adjust our compensation expectation? Yeah. 2 years ago, folks were writing their own offers, and I've seen it. Um, and so if you're somebody that you feel is your compensation is or was above current market, first of all, it's you should try to get in tune with what the compensation for your role, the compensation range for your role is. You always want to go into a conversation with a recruiter with that understanding, having done that homework. You shouldn't rely on whatever they're saying in terms of what the range is. You should have your own idea of, what the given range is. And I think there's another question down the line here about how do you bring that up? So that this will come up. It's typical for it to come up in a conversation early on in the process. And it'll look like something like this, like, what are your comp expectations for this role? Most recruiters won't ask, what are you currently making, right? It's just not, I don't know. There's an etiquette around it, and most recruiters won't ask that, but they will ask what your expectations are, what you're looking for in your next position. And so the best response that I appreciate is informed transparency about their range. And so you should come to the table with an informed transparency around that range. It should be a range. Yeah, it should be a range. And then you should also signal that you are flexible and that there's other things that are there's other aspects of an offer that are important beyond just the monetary base, for example, right? So they may have other ways to compensate that you might not even be aware of. And you could even turn the question on them and ask them, once you've answered the question, you could turn it on them and ask them,
So
if
Eric, I
there's,
have a follow-up to that. I
yeah,
guess since the compensation can have many components to it, when the question is being posed, right, what is the expectation for recruiters in terms of the specificity that candidates should be informed and researched about when they respond? Like, is it base and that's it? Because generally the equity percentage is a fixed number at a certain level. And so there's really hardly any room to negotiate there. And then there is a long tail of benefits, which are very different per company. So is it just the recruiters are expecting the candidates to be well researched about the base number, or is there something more there?
yeah, at a minimum, the base. So if you're in sales, you should have a good understanding of a base, but also sort of the variable component. Because most sales positions are, there's an OTE, and so the OTE is comprised of the base plus the variable. And
Yes.
so that's the language that they speak when they're talking about, the compensation for the role. So it might be specific to the role, but at the very minimum, you should have an understanding of what your expectations are for a base, right? Um, to the extent that that the conversation is going to go to a conversation about equity, and you would likely know that because just by virtue of the maturity of the company, right? If
Yes.
the company is, C, D, series stage, in all likelihood, you're not going to be negotiating equity, right? You know, they might have something that's already predefined and to negotiate it, depending on your level, right? If you're coming in as a C level, then you have more likely, regardless of the stage, there'll be some conversation around equity. But if you're coming in at I don't know, a VP or director, non-executive level, then it'll be really a function of the maturity of the company. So earlier stage companies, startups, they're really gunning to get the top talent, and they know that the equity is a major lever for them
Yes.
to attract the top talent. And um, so if that's where you are and that's sort of what you're going after, you should have in your mind some ideas of what is appropriate. Here's the thing: I've worked with a lot of early stage companies, and a lot of them don't have a precedent for what they are offering in terms of base compensation, in terms of bonus, and so yeah, maybe that was more prevalent 2 years ago, 3 years ago, but still, you should come to the table with some idea, right, and some argument for what you're looking for, and don't be rigid with it either, right? You always want to give, if you're in a negotiation, it's best to give options, right? you can, I mean, you could think of the little, you could think of an offer as, being comprised of of a bundle of different components, right? Base, bonus, equity, other non-monetary perks. And when you're negotiating, you can present different options that are all that all work for you, but it also gives the either the recruiter or the decision maker, the hiring manager, some feeling, some perception of empowerment, right? When they have
Yeah.
different options that they feel would work well for you, and then it gives them a little bit of it gives them some choice, right? And so
Makes
that's
sense.
one tactic that you can do when negotiating. But point is to have a good understanding of what the market will bear for your skills, for your level, for your title, and be able to present that early on. And again, from a recruiter's perspective, when somebody comes across, when I ask that question and they skirt around it or they try to play games, it tells me that either they don't know what their market value is, like they haven't done that homework. And if they have done that homework, it does tell me that they're not going to be transparent with me in the process. The other thing too is so it goes both ways, right? If somebody asks me as a recruiter, well, what do you have budgeted for this role? I totally respect that, and I answer it. If I answer it if I know it,
Right.
right?
Right.
So I'm not trying to play games either, right?
Yeah.
But this is just me. Like there's a whole spectrum of recruiters out there, right? Some are more experienced, some are less experienced. Some will try to play these games. Some are just more straightforward. So part of it is getting a read on the kind of recruiter you're working with as well, right? And so I think it helps everyone if they're just transparent about what they're looking for. They're not just transparent, but they're informed, right? So
Right.
it's one thing if, I mean, again, I've worked with clients that are not informed about what the talent market will bear. And so either they're more often than not, they're budgeting for the role is inadequate, right? And so they start getting, candidates that are maybe less experienced. And then there's a whole calibration thing that goes on, right? But the point is that to the extent that you're more informed, you're doing your part. You're more informed and you're more transparent. You're doing your part as an effective negotiator. So
That
And when
helps.
you present the components of the total compensation as options to consider, do you bring ranges for those components as well, or just signal that I would consider these other components as part of the compensation?
yeah, so the more informed you are, and to the extent that you can bring range to those other components, I don't. I mean, I wouldn't. So again, I'm coming from my perspective as a recruiter. That would come across to me as being informed, like you're informed. So it's a good thing, right? Um, at the same time, I wouldn't be too rigid either,
Mm.
because that you run the risk there too. If you come across as, well, I would like this, and this, from this range to this range, it could come across as being too rigid, right? And so what a recruiter is looking for is they're looking for overlap, right? They want to work you through the process, and they want to make sure that there's overlap in terms of compensation, right? So does that answer? Was that Jess? Did that answer your
Yeah.
question, Jess?
Um, yes.
Okay.
I'm just going through a recurring process where I'm not happy with the base salary
Okay.
range. Even after the recruiter that I'm working with has pushed the ceiling with his client. So I'm trying to understand like how I work with the other things that will go into the total compensation so that ultimately I'm happy. If I get the job, ultimately I'm happy with the total compensation, even though base salary I may not be happy with.
Yeah. Um, if you have the recruiter on your side in the sense that they've been championing you the whole way, and they've been very transparent with you, they could be a huge sort of advocate or partner for you, with you, in terms of the negotiation process, especially if you've gotten through, if you've gotten through the funnel, through the process, and maybe you're one of the last candidates, or maybe you are the last, maybe you are the candidate that they've extended the offer to. That recruiter just to kind of share sort of the mindset of the recruiter, they want you to close,
Yeah.
right? And so to the extent that they can either inform you and you could bounce stuff off of them, right? It's like if I look, if I came to the table with these options, how, because the recruiter is usually at that point, the recruiter is not the decision maker,
Mm.
right? The usually the hiring manager is the decision maker. And if something is to get escalated in terms of reevaluating the budget, then it's again from what I've seen. Usually it's the hiring manager either going to their boss or going to find someone in finance to sort of renegotiate that or to make some trade-offs, right? Sometimes it's a hiring manager because they have a sort of a fixed budget for whatever 5 headcount, and they can allocate that larger budget to however many headcount that they're thinking about, and so they have some room to play with that as well. But as far as what I'm saying, like I think that there may be opportunity to, if in fact that what I'm describing is resembles the recruiter that you're working with, you could use them as a sounding board and sort of push and say, hey, this is kind of what I'm looking for. There's a few options. You know, how do you think the hiring manager would be receptive to this or not? And again, hopefully they could, because this is what I've done, right? At that point, I think they're a great candidate. I think there's, obviously if an offer went out, there's a desire on the part of the hiring manager to have you on the team. And so now it's just working out what is sort of the right fit in terms of an offer that you could be happy with. And so I hope that helps.
Yeah, it does. It does.
All right.
The two takeaways, one, work with the recruiter since he seems to be on my side at the moment, and two, just do a bang up job on every single recruiting process to for the employer, the hiring manager to want me
Yeah, that's
to
a
increase
given,
the
right?
leverage.
That's a given, right? You
Yeah.
want them to want you, and then the more they want you, the more leverage you have in a negotiation. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm sure it probably goes without saying right now, a lot of the companies have a lot of the leverage right now. A lot of the employers have the leverage right now. And it's unfortunate, and I think, all this works like many things in life in cycles. And so it just happens that, the leverage for the most part, generally speaking, is in the employers, on the employer side right now. But again, to your point, there's ways that you can sort of swing the leverage by just being an amazing person, an amazing candidate, and having them want you specifically, right? Differentiating yourself from the other pool of candidates that are probably behind you, right?
Mm.
And so, yeah.
Thank you.
I see a few. Oh, was there a follow-up there? No? Okay, I just see a few questions here in the chat. Um, Jillian, as a UXR, there are a lot of well-researched reports. And okay, yeah. Kyle, question in the interviews I've landed. The one thing that I found in common was the fact that I applied online within 24 hours of posting. I have not been landing interviews by networking. Is applying early more reliable way of getting a resume recognized? Kyle, this is a great point because just to kind of give you a picture of what is likely going on behind the scenes, you have companies that are streamlining their the recruiting teams, which means there are reduction in force in terms of recruiters. So while, just as an example, if the company has 15 or 20 openings, maybe they have, one recruiter that's handling all of that, whereas before they had 2 or maybe 3 recruiters handling all of that. And so what ends up happening is the recruiter has these different job postings that go up that they're putting up, and then they get inbound, right? And so what ends up happening is that most recruiters will batch their processing for a given inbound stack. And so the point is that the the stack gets stale. The stack of inbound gets stale. And so what'll happen is that they'll get inbound. So let's say I posted a job today. I might let it sit for a few days to see what comes in. But at that point, I'm going to go back to it and be like, okay, well, what's come in? And I'm going to start looking, I'm going to sort of batch process that. And then the folks that I think are strong, I'm going to start working them through the next step. So what ends up happening is, yes, you do want to be quicker on the applicant stack. I can't speak to other folks' like, or other recruiters like cycle. They might post something and they may get a bunch of inbound in that 24 hours. And the next day they might start batch processing. They might let it sit for a week before they start batch processing. Right. So I can't speak to other folks' sort of cadence, but the point is that you want to get in before it gets stale. And what I mean by stale is that they've already gone through the stack and they've chosen their cohort, so to speak, and they're already working that cohort to the next stages. Right. So yes, time is of the essence. Let's see, Samir, I've heard companies will make offer expecting that the candidate will negotiate for hire, but when we're working with the recruiter, only you can come up with the compensation package options that work for you. Yeah, that happens. For evergreen positions, larger companies tend to have evergreen positions or postings because there's always this maybe churn or attrition. And so in those kind of situations, it's less likely that they'll sort of make exceptions with respect to budgeted, comp ranges. But for positions that are not evergreen, in fact, positions that are like new, maybe it's the first product management hire for a given company, right? That happens for early stage companies. You have much more there's much more latitude for creativity around, especially once they've determined that they like you and they want you on their team and they need you on their team. It's just a matter of working with them and coming up with creative negotiation options or packages. So some stats, Jess.
Yeah, I posted a message in response to, I think, what Kyle's question.
Okay.
Yeah, just how many applications there we get per back.
Yeah, it's crazy right now. It's so easy to apply, right? You one click apply, right? Easy apply. It's so easy to apply right now that recruiters and job postings are getting inundated. Okay, I see a question here with 3 upvotes. When you receive a cold email from a candidate, what would be more impressive? Bullet points selling the candidate, or a thoughtful question aimed at providing value? I think I answered this question last week. So sorry, I think this was kind of residual. I think a combination of both. I don't think there's any magic formula. The outreach messages, to my point earlier in this session, was that there's sort of a different levels of how people reach out, and hopefully that gives you a little bit of context of what it would take to kind of stick out a bit. But yeah, it's sort of finding a mix of understanding what you're bringing to the table, how that's relevant to the recruiter. So how it's relevant in terms of providing value to the recruiter, right? The recruiter wants to find candidates that will fill a position. That's their job, right? And so if you can help them to that end, then you'll garner more attention. Let's see. Okay. How can I get my LinkedIn profile to be reviewed by a recruiter? Yeah, you have to reach out to the recruiter and see if they'll give you some time. Yeah, and I think that this is part of what I try to help with, in more of a group setting is, I feel these questions to give you insight into sort of the the mindset of a recruiter and what's important to them and what they value. And I'll rattle some things off right now. It's generally speaking, as far as a LinkedIn profile, right? And you can Google this. You Google, you can ask ChatGPT. There's a bunch of basic stuff. You need to have a picture. You need to have a headline. You need to have a focused headline. You need to have an about section that's easy to read, right? If you just ask that of Google or Perplexity, which I use more frequently now, you'll get a great list. And that's table stakes. You need to have that stuff, right? It's rare that I ever see a LinkedIn profile without a picture. And I don't think that's any of you guys out there. But in terms of what sticks out to me as a recruiter, what I look at proximity, because that's important. So if most companies want to hire somebody that's in their region, in their area, in their city, ideally, right? So all things being equal, even if it's remote, right? Even if it's remote, they would still prefer somebody that's geographically closer. It's just human nature, right? And so I look at where they're located, right? I look at career progression. I look at tenure. When I do my career progression, I look at, have they been consistent in terms of their career and the titles or hats, that the roles that they've maintained. Is there a career progression in terms of increasing scope of responsibility, of accomplishment? And just keep in mind, this is my mindset as a recruiter, primarily for early to growth stage startups, right? And we talked about this a few weeks ago in terms of archetypes. And not to say that I'm rigid in terms of the archetypes that I'm looking for, but this has been sort of prevalent in terms of what my clients have been looking for. So if you don't fit that archetype, let's say you're a career changer, and let's say you changed careers 3 years ago, right? I would still be looking for that career progression and sort of the high potential person that has sort of a trajectory like this, right? And again, that's really maybe that's unique to the clients that I've been working with. What else do I look for? Maybe not so much initially, but I do look at recommendations on LinkedIn profiles. Right? It tells me that they've made the effort. It tells me that they have a network, especially for roles that are like where you're like a lead role or management role. Because somebody that has a good network of people that will endorse them, I assume, and usually the assumption is correct, that they are able to hire from their network, right? So when a lot of my clients are hiring, they're not just looking for that star candidate. Yes, they're looking for that, but they're also looking for somebody that people want to work with, right? And so are they able to, like if I'm hiring my first engineering manager, right? I like to look at, do they have endorsements? Do they have people that speak highly of them? Because that's sort of a proxy or signal for me that, you know what, if I hire this person, there may be people, like great people, that will follow this person. So as a recruiter, that's helpful for me, right? That's something that I look for. And maybe not initially, but the other things too is that I do look at LinkedIn profiles after the fact. So I may, maybe I get an inbound, maybe I'm sourcing the person, but I do look at people's LinkedIn profiles later or throughout the process, because sometimes things come up, and I need to either go validate that or draw on more clarifying questions. And so, maybe the question comes up, maybe it wasn't expressed initially by the hiring manager, but maybe there is a preference for somebody that can, we need a hiring manager, or we need an engineering manager, but budget just opened up and this engineering manager is going to have to hire 4 people in the next quarter. Oh, cool. Okay. So that's, what is their ability, their capacity to bring on people in their network? So then I might look at their LinkedIn profile. I might look at their connections. So your LinkedIn profile is not, as a recruiter, I don't just look at it once typically. I may look at it over time. And what I mean by time is throughout the interview process, as clarifying questions come up, as and maybe as the requirements get refined as well. So, what else do I look at a LinkedIn profile? Extracurriculars, right? Samir, you talked about your passion for classical music. Again, this is a way that it helps me remember the person. It gives me more facets through which I can understand a person. And so I do look at like extracurriculars. I look at that on a LinkedIn profile as well as a resume. Um, if there's any work samples or content that you're associating or tying to your LinkedIn profile, I look at that as well because it tells me like, what are you talking about? Do you have a platform? Do you have a voice? And not to say that you have to, but it does, it will set you apart from a lot of folks. Because again, thinking about what most people do, most people are not posting about their profession and what they're learning. They're just not. So if you do that, that's one step up, right? And so it really helps. Just looking at the time here, I think I have time for like maybe one more question. And again, we can hit this. I'll do this every week. But let's see. Okay. I'll touch on this one here. As a creative director, what kinds of AI programs should I be looking to enhance my skill set? So, I've been doing recruiting now for 11 years or so. And I've been coming to this from the angle, I've been coming to these coffee with recruiter sessions, mostly from the angle of my experience as a recruiter. More recently, over the past year or so, I've been really immersing myself in AI. And for those of you who don't know, prior to becoming a recruiter, I have a background in software product development and product management. And so I was, and I still am in my heart, a builder, a maker. And so this recruiting thing was sort of a little bit of a detour. And through that detour, I've come to learn a lot about people. Anyway, long story short, as far as AI, there are three things that are emerging in my mind about how generative AI can add value to companies. One is increasing revenue. Two is decreasing cost. And then three is, well, it's reducing human error. Four, it's also creating new experiences. And it's not just new experiences for the customer, but it's new experiences for the staff, the team, the internal team. How do they work? How do people work? That is evolving as a function of generative AI. I've seen it in recruiting, and I did a thing last week on Claude for Sheets, and that's an example of how AI is being integrated and changing how recruiters can work or job seekers can work, right? I did the example was it was in the context of a sort of a job seeker workflow. But the point is, as a creative director or as any professional, if you look at ways that your work can change and be streamlined or made more efficient or made reducing your error or allowing you to focus on higher level things, I would come to it from that lens, from that perspective, is how can AI change your work? Because if it can change your work, it could change the work for the team. It could change the work for the company. It could change the processes and operations through automation for the company. And if you could bring that lens, because all this is so new. Yes, automation's been around forever, but the ability for a largely lay person and like a non-technical person to introduce AI technology into a workflow is becoming so much more accessible now. And if you think about your workflow, you think about what you do, you think about how you add value to a team, to a company. If you can have opinions on how AI could further that, I think that'll be very powerful. It'll be very powerful in terms of an interview process when you're talking to somebody about what you could bring to the table. It'll set you apart for sure. And I think it'll also position you to operate more at a higher level within your profession as you start to delegate some of this more mundane or minutia to AI. So anyway, off my soapbox, but that's kind of some perspectives I have. Thank you guys all for joining and for sticking around. I'll do this next week. I might have to change the time again next week, but I'll communicate with you guys through the email and through the Slack. But I appreciate you guys being here and I appreciate your engagement and your questions. And I will see you next week.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a great week. Bye-bye.
Bye.